The bundle of damp, foul-smelling fabric hit my chest before falling to the floor, while the laughter of three young women flooded my own living room. I am Martha. I am 68 years old, and my hands have the calluses of someone who raised these walls brick by brick. The document that holds the fate of this property rests in a safe whose combination only I know, and today the clock started ticking. The physical impact of the clothes against my body didn't hurt as much as the silence that followed it. A thick silence that settled in the stale air of the room. I looked at the garments scattered across the rug I had vacuumed myself that very morning. There was a cheap silk blouse stained with makeup at the collar, tight sweatpants that still held the acrid stench of dried sweat, and a pair of socks that had rolled to a stop right against the toe of my orthopedic shoes. The cloying, cheap perfume radiating from Chloe, my daughter-in-law, mixed with the reek of dirty laundry, creating a suffocating atmosphere that seemed to perfectly summarize what my life had become over the last 2 years. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't let my shoulders drop. Behind my back, the muffled sound of the television coming from down the hall reminded me that in this house, I was completely alone in my trench. That TV was turned on by Arthur. My husband Arthur is 72 years old and has perfected the art of cowardice with a mastery that sometimes, in my darkest moments, I almost admire. We've been married for 45 years. In our youth, he worked at a lumber mill, and I made my living as an upholsterer. My fingers still bear the scars of curved needles from stretching heavy leather over hardwood frames, from gripping coarse fabrics, until my joints screamed in agony. With the money from those restored sofas, from those dining chairs brought back to life, we bought this lot. I mixed the concrete myself on weekends. I painted every single window frame. Arthur helped, of course, but his spirit was always fragile, terrified of conflict, prone to bowing his head at the slightest sign of a storm. Now, with old age, that fragility has hardened into a shell of pure indifference. When Chloe raises her voice when my son Jason slams the doors so hard the windows rattle, Arthur simply adjusts his hearing aid to turn it off, cranks up the volume on his football games, and vanishes into his own mind. He has decided that peace is bought by surrendering territory, ignoring the fact that invaders are never satisfied with just one corner. The invasion didn't start with shouting or dirty laundry thrown in my face. It started with tears and broken promises, the way the worst family tragedies usually begin. Jason, my only son, had tried to open an import business for cell phone parts. He took out loans he couldn't pay. He trusted partners who abandoned him at the first sign of bankruptcy, and at 40 years old, he found himself staring into a financial abyss with a wife who absolutely refused to give up her lifestyle. I remember the night they showed up at my door. It was pouring rain, one of those November storms that turn the streets into rivers of mud. Jason had red eyes, slumped shoulders, the spitting image of defeat. Chloe was right beside him, clutching a designer suitcase that contrasted absurdly with the misery of the moment. She was crying too, or at least faking it, with a conviction that actually moved me at the time. "Just a few months, Mom," Jason begged as we sat at the kitchen table while I poured them hot coffee. "Until I get a steady job and we can rent a small place. I swear we won't be a burden." I looked at my son, the little boy whose school costumes I had sewn, whose scraped knees I had bandaged, and I felt that ancient, gut-wrenching pull that condemns mothers to sacrifice their own peace for the survival of their blood. I said yes. Arthur nodded silently from his chair, already surrendering his territory. I gave him the guest room, the biggest one after the master, the one with a large window overlooking the rose garden I had planted 3 decades ago. I made space for them in my closets, cleared out 3 shelves in the fridge, and handed them a set of keys. That was my first tactical error. I thought I was opening the doors to a temporary shelter, when in reality I was handing over the keys to my own prison. For the first few months, they kept up the facade of gratitude. Chloe would wake up early, make breakfast, sweep the patio, and call me Miss Martha with a sweetness that made my teeth ache. Jason landed a job as a route supervisor for a logistics company, a decent gig that covered the basic bills. But human beings can't fake their true nature for long. Chloe's courtesy had an expiration date, and it expired the exact moment she realized Arthur wouldn't enforce a single rule, and that I, in my desperate attempt to keep the family peace, preferred to stay quiet rather than start a war under my own roof. The metamorphosis was gradual, calculated, almost imperceptible at first. First, their contributions to the household expenses vanished. The money they were supposedly going to hand over at the end of the month to help with the water and power was never mentioned again. When one day, after getting an electric bill that was double the usual amount, I asked Jason about it, Chloe stepped in before my son could even form a word. "We're saving for our own place, Martha," she told me, dropping the miss for the first time. "We thought the goal was for us to get independent quickly. If we pay you rent, we'll never be able to leave. Besides, this house is already paid off. It's not like it costs you extra to have us here." The logic was perverse, twisted, but Jason looked at her with pure devotion and nodded silently, begging me for patience with his eyes. I shoved the bill into my apron pocket and paid it out of my Social Security. I stayed quiet. I watched. I started taking mental notes of every move on the chessboard. Then came the hostile takeover of my spaces. My potted ferns and African violets were banished to the backyard because, according to Chloe, they gave her allergies and made the house look like a grandma lived there. In their place appeared cheap, shiny plastic decorations, fashion magazines scattered across every table, shoes dumped right in the middle of the hallway. The kitchen, my sanctuary for 40 years, turned into an active minefield. Chloe stopped cooking entirely and started ordering delivery almost every single night. The greasy pizza boxes, the half-eaten Chinese takeout containers, the sticky glasses. Everything was left on the counter for me to clean up the next morning. If I didn't do it, the ants would invade the place. Jason would leave for work before the sun even came up, completely blind and deaf to the disaster his wife left in her wake. When I tried to talk to him alone one dawn, while pouring his thermos of coffee, he cut me off with an impatience that hurt worse than any insult. "Mom, please. Chloe is depressed about our situation. Don't pressure her. Just wipe up whatever she messes up. I'll make it up to you later. Don't make a big deal out of something so small." That was the exact moment I realized I had lost my son. He was no longer the man I had raised. He had mutated into the human shield for a woman who absolutely despised me. And Chloe's contempt wasn't quiet. It was active, loud, and deeply cruel. Once she realized how passive I was, that I would pick up her plates and scrub her grease-caked skillets without a word of complaint, she started treating me not as a host, but as a live-in maid she had scored for free. Worse still, she constructed a twisted narrative to justify her presence in my house to the outside world. I heard it for the first time about 8 months ago. Chloe was on the phone in the hallway, her voice ringing out with that characteristic shrillness of someone who needs the entire world to pay attention to her words. "Yeah, girl, it's exhausting," she was saying, sighing dramatically. "Jason and I had to move in here to take care of his parents. They're getting super old, you know? Martha can barely keep herself together, and Arthur is practically deaf. If we weren't here keeping this place in order, they'd completely fall apart. It's a massive sacrifice for our marriage, but family comes first." I was 10 feet away, holding a laundry basket that weighed 20 pounds. Laundry that included her bedsheets and my son's work shirts. I felt the blood boiling in my veins, a furious white-hot heat that surged from my stomach straight to my throat. The lie was so colossal, so utterly shameless, that for a split second, I was ready to drop the basket, march up to her, rip the phone out of her hand, and scream the truth to whoever was on the other end of the line. I wanted to tell them she hadn't paid a single utility bill in a year and a half. I wanted to tell them she slept until noon. I wanted to tell them this house was kept standing by my daily labor, by the sweat of my brow and my Social Security checks. But I stopped myself. My personality has always been that of a woman who thinks before she acts, who knows that battles are never won with impulsive screaming matches in a hallway. As an upholsterer, I learned that if you cut the fabric in a fit of frustration, you ruin the entire piece of furniture. You have to measure twice, take a deep breath, and make the cut only when you are absolutely certain the line is perfect. I gripped the plastic edges of the laundry basket so hard, my knuckles turned white. I turned around in silence and carried the clothes to the bedrooms. That day, something soft and maternal died inside me, and in its place, a sentinel of solid ice was born. That strategic coldness was the only thing that allowed me to endure the following months. I watched as Chloe invited her friends over with increasing frequency, treating my living room like her own private country club. I watched as Arthur retreated earlier and earlier to his corner, cranking up his sports to block out reality. I watched Jason come home exhausted, kiss his wife on the forehead, and lock himself in their room, completely ignoring me unless he needed a uniform ironed. I kept cleaning. I kept cooking. I kept paying. But I also started quietly organizing my documents. I reviewed the deed to the house. I slipped out to the notary's office in silence one Tuesday morning while they were still asleep. I asked precise questions, got crystal clear answers, and locked the resulting paperwork in the wall safe, hidden behind the false back of my bedroom closet. A safe Arthur had completely forgotten existed, and for which only I had the combination. I was preparing the battlefield, waiting for the exact moment Chloe's insolence crossed the point of no return. That moment arrived today, a Thursday afternoon that began with a thick electric tension in the air. Since noon, Chloe had been absolutely frantic. She announced that two of her best friends were coming over, women she knew from her days of supposed wealth, women who wore designer labels and drove brand-new SUVs. Chloe wanted to impress them. She needed to keep the charade alive that she was the lady of the house, the self-sacrificing benefactor managing a massive estate. At 1 in the afternoon, she found me in the kitchen, making a pot of lentil stew. She stomped in, arms crossed, her brow deeply furrowed. "Martha, I need you to turn that off," she ordered, pointing at the stove. "The smell of poor people food is going to soak into the drapes. I ordered sushi platters and imported cheese boards. My friends get here at 4. I want you to deep clean the living room, dust the furniture, and make sure the guest bathroom is spotless. And please, when they get here, don't hover around. I don't want you making them uncomfortable. You can stay in your room or go out to the patio with Arthur." I looked at her. I simply looked at her. There wasn't a single ounce of respect in her eyes, only the cold, hard entitlement of someone who believes they hold absolute power over an inferior being. In another time, any woman of my generation would have raised a hand or unleashed an insult that would have rattled the drywall. But not me. I gave a slow nod. I turned off the burner under the lentils. I grabbed a dust rag and headed to the living room. I cleaned. I polished the oak wood that I had sanded down myself 20 years ago. I vacuumed the rug. I scrubbed the guest bathroom until the tiles reflected my own tired, emotionless face. Arthur watched me from his recliner. He saw the tension locked in my jaw, and without saying a single word, he stood up, grabbed his little portable radio, and slipped out the back door into the garden, fleeing the imminent confrontation, just like always. At 4:15, the doorbell rang. I heard Chloe's heels clicking frantically down the hardwood hallway. She threw open the door, and a chorus of high-pitched voices and exaggerated gasps invaded the foyer. It was two women predictably weighed down by ostentatious jewelry and perfumes that violently assaulted the senses. From the kitchen where I had obediently taken refuge, I listened to the dynamic unfold. Chloe guided them into the living room, pouring white wine and arranging the food platters that I had been forced to receive from the delivery guy, and played on my best ceramic serving dishes. The conversation was frivolous, entirely hollow, punctuated by shrill, echoing laughter. They talked about vacations they could no longer afford, about designer bags they were dying to buy, about the lives of other people they deeply looked down upon. And inevitably, the topic pivoted to me. "Oh, Chloe, seriously, this house is massive," one of the voices said, dripping with fake awe. "Doesn't it take so much work to keep it up? With your in-laws getting so old, you must be completely exhausted." "You have no idea, girl," Chloe replied, sighing with that suffocating theatricality I had come to loathe. "It's a full-time job. I literally have to follow the old lady around so she doesn't ruin things. She's losing her mind, you know? She forgets to clean, she cooks stuff that smells horrendous. But whatever." Jason begged me to be patient. "We give them a roof and food. The absolute least they can do is try not to get in the way." We give them a roof. That sentence floated in the kitchen air, heavy as an iron anvil. We give them a roof. In the house my callus is built. in the house whose deed is exclusively in my name because Arthur insisted on putting it in my name 3 decades ago to protect me if he passed away. In the house where I pay the power, the water, the gas, and even the internet connection Chloe uses to post pictures of her fake life on social media. I waited a few minutes. I let them drink more wine. I let them sink deep into their comfortable bubble of superiority. Then I picked up an empty serving tray and walked toward the living room. My initial intention was simply to clear the dirty glasses, maintain my facade of total submission just a little bit longer, and mentally document the humiliation to fuel my resolve. I stepped into the living room in total silence. The 3 women were sitting on the main sofa, the exact same sofa I had reupholstered in dark green velvet, an expense that took me months of saving. Seeing me, Chloe's friends went completely quiet, looking me up and down with a nauseating mix of pity and disdain. Chloe tensed up. She didn't like her maid interrupting her stage play. Her eyes narrowed into slits. She wanted to assert her dominance. She needed to make it crystal clear, right in front of her audience, who the true queen of the castle was. She stood up abruptly, marched into the hallway, where she had intentionally left a hamper overflowing with her dirty laundry from the last 3 days, and stormed back into the living room. She planted herself less than 3 feet in front of me. Her friends watched with wide eyes, practically salivating for the spectacle. Chloe reached into the basket and yanked out a handful of clothes. Without warning, without a single shred of basic human decency, she threw the bundle directly at my chest. The impact of the damp, foul-smelling fabric made me stumble half a step back. The clothes hit the floor with a dull thud. "Wash this, now," Chloe snapped, raising her voice to guarantee every single syllable echoed off the living room walls. Her tone was sharp, dripping with contempt, loaded with entirely unprovoked cruelty. "I need that blouse for tomorrow, and scrub the sweatpants hard. That's why we give you a free roof in this house, so you're at least good for something. Don't think we're just keeping you around as a decoration." The silence that followed was absolute. The television down the hall kept murmuring, but in the living room, time seemed to completely freeze. One of the friends let out a nervous little giggle and brought her wineglass to her lips, looking away. The other just locked eyes with me, waiting to see if the fragile old woman was going to burst into tears, drop to her knees and beg, or have a full-blown nervous breakdown. I didn't do any of those 3 things. I kept my gaze deadlocked on Chloe's face. I saw the pure arrogance in her tilted chin, the juvenile defiance in her dark eyes, the desperate, clawing need for validation hiding right behind her cruelty. She wanted me to react. She wanted me to scream at her so she could turn to her friends and say, "See, I told you. She's crazy. She's unbearable." If I had exploded, I would have handed her the exact ammunition she needed to justify her behavior to my son and to the rest of the world. But I am a strategist. I have survived grinding poverty, back-breaking labor, a husband who was a ghost, and the crushing disappointment of a weak son. A spoiled little girl playing house wasn't going to break me with a pile of dirty laundry. I didn't say a single word. My face didn't betray a flicker of emotion. Slowly, with the deliberate, aching slowness of my 68 years, I bent my knees. The popping of my joints was the only sound in the room. I reached out with my rough hands and gathered the stained silk blouse, the sweatpants reeking of body odor, and the socks. I pressed them against my apron. I stood back up, keeping my spine perfectly straight, never once breaking eye contact with Chloe. Her haughty smirk faltered for a fraction of a second when met with my absolute silence, with the complete lack of submission in my eyes. There was no defeat in my stare. There was a death sentence. I turned around. I walked past her friends who pulled their legs back as if terrified my very presence might infect them with some disease. I walked down the hardwood hallway. Behind me, I heard Chloe let out an exaggerated theatrical sigh. "Oh my God, you really have to teach them who's actually in charge," she said, her voice regaining its swagger now that my back was turned. "It's literally like dealing with toddlers. Anyway, pour some more wine, girls." The laughter erupted again, filling my house with an echoing mockery that embedded itself directly into the drywall. I walked to the end of the hall, crossed the kitchen, and stepped into the laundry room. The cold tile beneath my feet helped ground my racing thoughts. I flicked on the fluorescent light. I looked at the white washing machine I had bought with my own hard-earned savings 3 years ago. I looked at the detergent, the fabric softener, the scrubbing brushes, and then my eyes drifted to the right corner of the room. Sitting there, neatly folded in a stack, were the black trash bags, thick, heavy-duty industrial-grade plastic bags I used for hauling away yard waste and thorny brush. The clock had started ticking. The indignity had hit its absolute limit, and the debt had just been calculated. I threw Chloe's clothes onto the closed lid of the washing machine. The smell of sweat and cheap perfume choked the tiny space. I stepped over to the corner, grabbed one of the thick black bags, and snapped it open with a sharp flick of my wrists. The crack of the plastic echoed like a gunshot in the laundry room. I shoved the silk blouse inside. I shoved the sweatpants inside. I shoved the socks inside. But I didn't stop there. The decision was made. The gears were turning, and there wasn't a force on this earth that could make me back down. I locked the laundry room door behind me, making sure the deadbolt clicked firmly into place, isolating myself from the noise of the living room, ready to execute the opening move of the endgame. The thick black plastic crinkled roughly between my calloused fingers as I opened the bag all the way. I didn't stop with the makeup-stained blouse or the rancid sweatpants or the socks Chloe had thrown at my chest with the insolence of someone who truly believes they are untouchable. My eyes scanned the small room, locking onto the overflowing wicker hamper my daughter-in-law had dragged in that very morning. It was a mountain of pure negligence and vanity. There were designer jeans with rhinestones on the pockets, tight club dresses that smelled of cigarette smoke and cheap liquor, lace underwear she constantly demanded I hand wash with neutral soap, and fine knit sweaters she left dumped in every corner of my house. All of it was sitting right there, waiting for my 68-year-old hands, the exact same hands that had mixed the concrete for the foundation of this property, to restore a cleanliness that its owner completely lacked on the inside. I grabbed the wicker hamper by the handles and dumped it straight into the black bag. The clothes cascaded down, mixing with the dust and dried leaves that had settled at the bottom of the plastic. I didn't feel rage. Rage is a hot, messy, out-of-control emotion that makes your hands shake and clouds your judgment. What I felt was absolute clarity, cold, sharp, and precise as broken glass. I shoved my arms deep into the bag and pushed the clothes down hard, compacting the fabric to make more room. I grabbed a second bag off the shelf and repeated the process with the coats and jackets left hanging carelessly on the rack by the back door. Garments Chloe hoarded there, complaining that the closets in the guest room were just too small for her wardrobe. I tied off the tops of both bags with blind knots, pulling the plastic tight until my knuckles went completely pale. They were heavy. They weighed almost as much as 2 years of silent humiliations, of unpaid bills, of dirty dishes abandoned on my counters, and of blatant disrespect in front of houseguests. But my back, built from decades of hauling rolls of leather and solid wood frames around an upholstery shop, did not bow. I dragged the first bag across the tile floor to the side door that led out to the paved alleyway, then went back for the second. The wall clock in the kitchen read 4:35 p.m. In my neighborhood, the city garbage truck runs on an ironclad schedule every Thursday. It rolls through at exactly 4:40, announcing its arrival with the deep, throaty roar of its diesel engine and the high-pitched squeal of its air brakes. I kicked the side door open. The late afternoon sun hit my face, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. In the distance, just 2 blocks away, I heard the unmistakable sound of the truck turning the corner. I dragged the bags out to the concrete curb I had leveled myself 20 years ago. I stood at the edge of the street, smoothed my apron over my stomach, and waited. The massive green and white vehicle hissed to a monumental halt right in front of my house. Hanging off the back, gripping the metal bar with the casual familiarity of a lifetime, was Mike. Mike is a broad-shouldered guy baked by the sun, with an easy smile, who has been working these streets for 15 years. He knows every single neighbor. He knows who recycles, who sneaks construction debris into the trash, And who brings him a glass of ice water on a brutal summer day? I always had a pitcher of lemonade waiting for him in July, and fresh pastries in December. In working-class neighborhoods, loyalty isn't signed on paper. It's built on daily, quiet respect. Mike hopped down to the curb, wiping the sweat off his forehead with his forearm. When he saw me standing next to the two massive black lumps, he raised a thick eyebrow. "Afternoon, Miss Martha," he greeted me, stepping up to the bags. "Wow, looks like you decided to do some serious spring cleaning today. Clearing out the attic. These things weigh like they're full of rocks." "Good afternoon, Mike," I replied, my voice as steady and monotonous as the truck's idling engine. "It's not the attic, it's just accumulated garbage. Things that serve absolutely no purpose anymore, taking up space and attracting pests. I needed them out of my house once and for all." Mike nodded, not asking another question. That's the beauty of hardworking people. They understand that there are burdens you just need to throw away without giving an explanation. He grabbed the knot of the first bag, bent his knees, and heaved it into the steel jaws of the truck's hopper with a grunt. Then he did the exact same thing with the second. The silk blouse, the exclusive jeans, the lace underwear. It all landed on a foul mattress of organic rot, soggy cardboard, and the rotting food scraps of the entire neighborhood. "Hit it, kid," Mike yelled to the driver, slapping the side of the truck with an open palm. I stood right there, frozen on the curb, and I watched. The hydraulic mechanism roared to life with a deafening hum. The massive steel plate came down without an ounce of mercy, trapping the black bags. The thick plastic held out for a fraction of a second before exploding violently under the colossal pressure. Through the jagged tear, I watched as the shimmering silk of that blouse Chloe desperately needed for tomorrow was irreversibly churned into coffee grounds and rotting fruit peels. I watched the machine shred, crush, and swallow the entire wardrobe, dragging it deep into the pitch-black belly of the compactor until absolutely nothing was left. The sound of grinding metal tearing through fabric was in that moment the most beautiful symphony I had heard in years. "All set, Miss Martha," Mike said, swinging back up onto the metal bar. "You have a great afternoon, and take care of yourself. You're looking a little pale." "I am perfectly fine, Mike," I answered. "Better than ever." And it was the absolute truth. The truck rumbled away, taking the first installment of the debt with it, leaving behind a sharp cloud of diesel exhaust that I breathed in deeply, filling my lungs. I stepped back inside through the side door and through the deadbolt. From the front of the house, the echoes of Chloe and her guests' shrill laughter still bounced off the living room walls, completely oblivious to the execution that had just taken place a few yards away. I didn't go toward them. I walked in total silence to my bedroom, the master suite at the far end of the opposite hallway. I opened the door and locked it behind me. The room was cast in shadows, submerged in that dusty, heavy quiet that old marriages live in once love has been entirely replaced by habit and sheer exhaustion. Arthur wasn't there. He was probably still cowering in the furthest corner of the backyard, fiddling with his radio dial, so he wouldn't have to hear his world collapsing. I walked straight to the heavy oak wardrobe that took up the entire left wall. I pushed aside the thick winter coats that smelled faintly of mothballs and pressed hard on the wooden panel at the back. It gave way with a soft click, revealing the small steel safe bolted directly into the concrete. I spun the metal dial. 4, 17, 31. The heavy door swung open smoothly. Inside, protected inside a clear plastic folder, rested the original deed to the property. I pulled it out and sat on the edge of the bed, flicking on the nightstand lamp. I ran my fingers over the stamped paper, feeling the raised seal of the official signatures. The document was in my name. Exclusively my name. Martha Carmen Salazar. When we bought this plot of land, Arthur had been the one who insisted on doing it this way. Back then, he worked at the lumber mill, surrounded by massive saw blades and lethal machinery. One day, a coworker of his lost an arm. Another lost his life, entirely crushed under a pile of pine logs. The sheer terror of leaving me destitute if he died in a workplace accident pushed him to put the only asset we owned entirely under my absolute legal control. As the decades dragged on, Arthur forgot that minor legal detail. assuming that marriage magically turned everything into a shared asset. Jason, our son, grew up believing this house was his guaranteed inheritance from the patriarch. And Chloe, in her infinite, blinding arrogance, assumed that by manipulating Jason and bullying Arthur, she already had the keys to the castle sitting in her pocket. Not a single one of them remembered that in the eyes of the state, this dirt, these bricks, and this roof belonged to me and only me. I slipped the deed into my black leather purse right next to my ID and the paid water and power bills I covered with my pension. I slipped off my orthotic house shoes. I put on a pair of sensible closed-toe walking shoes. I smoothed my gray hair in the vanity mirror, and I walked out of the room. I moved down the hallway, stepping carefully so the floorboards wouldn't creak. I passed the living room without casting a single glance inside. I only heard the clinking of wine glasses and my daughter-in-law's voice saying, "Honestly, the poor thing can't even string a thought together anymore, girls. I gave her a blouse to wash and she probably fell asleep standing up in the kitchen." I slipped out the front door, closing it behind me in absolute dead silence. The office of Robert Vance, attorney at law, was 15 blocks away on a tree-lined avenue where old neighborhood shops stood shoulder to shoulder with modern bank branches. Robert wasn't just a respected lawyer and notary. He was an ally of a breed you rarely see anymore. He had known my family since before Jason was even born. He was the one who drafted the purchase contracts for the land, the one who advised me when I wanted to make my little upholstery business official, and the one who watched my hands go from soft and unblemished to covered in the thick scars of brutal, honest labor. I walked into his office at 5:15 p.m. The brass bell above the glass door announced my arrival. The smell of aging paper, freshly brewed coffee, and floor wax washed over me instantly, wrapping me in a profound sense of order and legality that my own home had completely lost. Robert was sitting behind his mahogany desk, adjusting his thick-rimmed glasses as he read through a file. When he looked up and recognized me, a warm, genuine smile lit up his wrinkled face. But the smile vanished the second he noticed the iron rigidity of my jaw and the way I was clutching my purse tight against my chest. "Martha," he said, standing up immediately. "What a surprise. Come in, please, sit down. Is everything all right? Is Arthur okay?" I opened my purse, pulled out the clear plastic folder, and slid it across the polished surface of his desk. "Arthur is alive, Robert. Whether he's okay is a different story entirely, but he is breathing," I replied, my tone utterly stripped of any emotional decoration. "I'm here because I need to pull the trigger on what we briefly discussed the last time I came in for a consultation. I need the official paperwork, Robert, today. You explained to me that since my son and his wife don't pay rent, don't have a lease agreement, and don't contribute a dime to the structural expenses, the law considers them tenants at will, living here under my tolerance. As the sole registered owner, I have the absolute right to revoke that tolerance and demand they vacate the property. I want it in writing, with stamps, seals, and signatures. I want their permission to live on my property officially revoked. I want the document to establish a strict, non-negotiable legal deadline of 30 days for them to pack up, get their things out, and hand over the keys. And I want it explicitly stated that if they fail to do so, we will proceed with law enforcement." Robert was a man of the law, but he also understood the crushing weight of human grief. "Martha, listen to me very carefully," he warned, his voice dropping to a soft, serious register as he leaned across the desk. "I will draft exactly what you're asking for. My duty and my loyalty are to you. But I need you to fully understand the consequences of walking out that door with this paper. Jason is your son. If you hand him an eviction notice signed by a lawyer, the fracture will be permanent. There is no going back from this. Your daughter-in-law will use this to turn him against you for the rest of your life. Are you absolutely certain you want to start this war?" I thought about my banished flower pots. I thought about my rejected food. I thought about my life violently reduced to unpaid servitude inside the very house I built with my own blood. "I'm not starting a war, Robert. The war started the day I handed them the keys to my house, and they decided I was just an annoying piece of old furniture," I answered, my voice ringing out metallic and absolute. "The fabric is already cut. I just need to stitch the final seam, draft the papers. I will pay your retainer in cash right now." He buzzed his assistant, dictated the precise legal terms, cited the corresponding statutes of the Civil Code, and 40 minutes later, he placed 3 copies of an official stamped and numbered document bearing the blue letterhead of his firm right in front of me. I signed every single page with a rock-steady hand. The stroke of my pen was fast, dark, and utterly final. I tucked the copies safely into my purse. I shook Robert's hand, said my goodbyes, and walked back out onto the street. The late afternoon air was starting to bite with a chill, but I felt a clean, highly controlled fire roaring in my chest. The walk home felt shorter. When I slid the key into the front door, the silence that greeted me was thick and sticky. Chloe's friends had already left. I stepped into the foyer and walked toward the living room. The scene was a disaster zone. There were wine glasses smeared with bright lipstick scattered across the end tables, dried-out pieces of sushi stuck to the ceramic platters I had washed myself, crumpled napkins thrown on the floor, and couch cushions tossed every which way. The stench of cheap perfume and stale alcohol hung heavy in the air. From down the hall, I heard Chloe's frantic footsteps. She burst out of the guest room, violently yanking drawers open and slamming them shut. She was wearing a pair of shorts and a basic t-shirt. Her hair was a rat's nest, and her face, entirely stripped of the arrogant smirk she had worn just hours ago, projected a rapidly escalating cocktail of confusion and raw panic. When she saw me standing in the threshold of the living room, she froze in her tracks. Her eyes went wide. "Martha!" she screamed, completely abandoning the condescending, syrupy tone she used in front of her audience. "Where the hell are my clothes? I went to the laundry room and the washer is empty. The hamper is gone. My jackets aren't on the rack by the door. Where did you hide them? I need that silk blouse for a dinner tonight." "I did exactly what you asked me to do," I replied, my voice perfectly calm, almost monotonous against the chaotic energy she was radiating. "You said the house smelled like poor people's food. You said we needed to maintain a high standard for your friends. I noticed there was a massive pile of garbage attracting a terrible odor and cluttering up the common areas. I simply maintained order, just like you said we needed to. I took advantage of the city garbage truck driving by. There was over $4,000 worth of clothes in that hamper. Tell me this is a sick joke. Tell me you hid them in your room." "By now," I said, "they are being compacted under several tons of rotting garbage at the Southside landfill." At that exact second, the rattling of the lock on the side door interrupted us. Jason walked into the house dressed in his gray logistics supervisor uniform, hauling his heavy work backpack. He stopped dead at the end of the hallway, taking in the scene with exhausted, alarmed eyes. "What's going on? Why are you screaming like that, Chloe?" my son asked, dropping his bag to the floor and rushing toward her. Chloe threw herself into his arms, sobbing with a theatricality that would have been hilarious if it wasn't so pathetic. She buried her face in Jason's chest, pointing a trembling finger at me over his shoulder. "Your mother is insane, Jason. She has completely lost her mind," she wailed, choking on manufactured tears. "She took all my dirty laundry, my silk blouses, my jeans, my jackets, and she threw them into the garbage truck. She left me with nothing. I told you she's lost it. That she does things out of pure spite because she hates us. Look what she did." Jason stiffened. He let go of his wife and marched toward me. He stopped 3 feet away, aggressively invading my personal space, trying to use his height to physically intimidate me, a tactic he had watched his wife use on me countless times. "Mom, tell me this isn't true," Jason demanded, his voice tight like a coiled spring, his fists clenched at his sides. "Did you seriously throw her clothes in the trash? What the hell is wrong with you, Chloe? Gave them to you to wash. We keep you company, we take care of you, and you pull a stunt like this? You are going to pay her back for every single cent of what you threw away. You are going to pull money out of your Social Security and buy her a whole new wardrobe tomorrow morning." Looking up at him, I didn't see a man. I saw a coward demanding my unconditional surrender just to buy himself a few hours of domestic peace. He was the exact echo of the father who, at that very moment, was still hiding out in the bushes. "I am not paying a single red cent, Jason," I said, my voice dropping an octave, turning heavy and incredibly dangerous. Your wife threw her dirty, rotting clothes directly at my face in front of total strangers. And she told me that was the reason you two gave me a free roof in this house. Maybe Chloe is right. Maybe you need a medical evaluation. Or maybe it's time I take total administrative control of this house, and you can step down and rest. From the end of the hall, Chloe nodded vigorously, wiping away her fake tears, glaring at me with undiluted hatred. I let the silence settle over the living room. I let my son's threat bounce off the walls I had built, let it seep into the furniture I had upholstered. I slowly raised my right hand and rested it on the black leather of my purse, feeling the hard, rigid edge of the legal folder inside. My fingers traced the flap. Jason was waiting for an apology. He was waiting for the pathetic sobbing of a terrified old woman begging for forgiveness so she wouldn't be shipped off to a nursing home or locked in a dark corner under his new regime. I gave him absolutely none of that. I offered the faintest ghost of a smile, an imperceptible curve at the corner of my lips that didn't even come close to reaching my eyes. Clear rules, I repeated, tasting my son's words on my tongue, feeling the massive weight of the document that was about to permanently derail the course of history. You are absolutely right, Jason. We need very clear rules about exactly who is giving a roof to whom. I pulled my purse tight against my body, knowing the chessboard had just been violently flipped, and took a step forward. I walked right past him without brushing his arm. My left shoulder was millimeters from Jason's puffed-up chest, but I didn't flinch, I didn't step back, and I didn't speed up my pace. The hardwood floorboards creaked under my sensible shoes, beating out a steady, methodical rhythm identical to the punch of an industrial sewing machine driving through layers of thick leather. Behind me, my son's stunned silence and my daughter-in-law's theatrical sobbing crashed uselessly against my perfectly straight back. I felt Jason's hand reach out to grab my arm, a clumsy primal instinct for physical domination, but he stopped midair. The energy I was radiating in that moment wasn't that of a mother willing to negotiate. It was the aura of a landlord walking the halls of her own estate. I kept my right hand locked on the strap of my purse, feeling the stiff manila envelope holding the notarized eviction notice through the leather. That piece of paper was the sharp edge of the scissors. I just needed to measure the fabric one last time before making the final cut. I reached the door of the master bedroom. I turned the brass knob, stepped inside, and locked it behind me. The metallic click echoed with absolute finality. The room was drowning in the bluish gloom of early evening. On the bed, under a heavy wool blanket, Arthur was sleeping soundly, or at least faking it, with the mastery of a man who had spent half a century running away from reality. The air smelled of his eucalyptus joint rub and the dust trapped in the heavy drapes Chloe so deeply despised. I sat on the edge of the mattress without turning on the lamp. I slowly slipped off my shoes, feeling the dull, throbbing ache in my swollen ankles. The adrenaline was finally flushing out of my bloodstream, leaving behind a mental clarity so brutally cold it almost hurt to breathe. I stared at the motionless silhouette of my husband, and my mind drifted backward, dragged out to sea by the tide of memory. It was the winter of 1994. Jason was 17, and the whole world was too small for him. One Friday night, he snuck out and stole the neighbor's car, an old sedan the man used to make his living as a cab driver, and wrapped it around a telephone pole 3 blocks away. The neighbor, desperate and furious, threatened to call the cops and ruin my son's life if we didn't pay for the damages in cash immediately. Arthur, true to his nature, locked himself in the bathroom and cried, sobbing that we were financially ruined. I was the one who walked down to the upholstery shop in the basement that very dawn. I was the one who took on a rush order, severely underpaid, to reupholster every single booth in a highway diner. I still remember the eye-watering stench of industrial glue, the red dust of polyurethane foam floating in the basement air. I worked for 72 hours straight, my fingers split open. The curved needle drove straight through the pad of my right thumb, leaving a dark bloodstain on the red vinyl of one of the seats. I paid off Jason's debt bill by crumpled bill. When I handed him the receipt from the auto body shop, my son didn't even say thank you. He just grabbed his jacket and went out to play soccer with his friends, visibly relieved that his sheer stupidity carried zero consequences. In that moment, I honestly believed I was protecting him. I believed that bleeding for him was the ultimate expression of a mother's love. Sitting there in the dark of my bedroom, I finally understood the catastrophic magnitude of my mistake. Blind love doesn't raise strong men. It manufactures cowardly tyrants. I had taught Jason that there would always be someone standing by, ready to bleed just to clean up his disasters. And now he fully expected me to keep bleeding, just to keep his wife's psychotic fantasy intact. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I sat in the armchair by the window, watching the pitch-black darkness slowly dissolve into the gray tones of dawn. At 7 in the morning, I heard noises in the kitchen. Rushed footsteps, the clinking of coffee mugs, tense whispering. Jason hadn't gone to work. I put on a clean apron. I pulled my gray hair back into a tight bun at the nape of my neck. I grabbed my purse with the legal documents inside, and I walked out into the hall. When I stepped into the kitchen, the scene waiting for me confirmed my darkest suspicion. Jason had decided to make good on his threat from the night before. Sitting at the head of my oak dining table, cradling a steaming mug of tea, was a woman in her 50s, wearing an impeccable tailored suit and wire-rimmed glasses. Resting on the table in front of her was a leather briefcase and an open notepad. Jason was standing by the fridge, arms crossed, brow furrowed, while Chloe sat next to the stranger, rubbing her eyes with a tissue in a pathetic, theatrical attempt to fake a crying fit. "Mom," Jason said the second I crossed the threshold, his voice dripping with a fake, sickening compassion that made my stomach turn. "I'm so glad you're up. This is Dr. Helen Monroe. She's a psychiatrist specializing in geriatrics. I asked her to come see you after the incident with the clothes yesterday. You looked at me with these blank eyes, like you didn't even recognize me. Living like this is torture. We're terrified that one day you're going to leave the gas on or accidentally hurt Dad. With a medical diagnosis of senile dementia, he could initiate a legal guardianship process, declare me mentally incompetent to manage my own assets, and consequently seize absolute control of my house. It was a hostile takeover executed by a coward weaponizing medicine. I walked straight to the coffee maker. I grabbed my white ceramic mug and poured myself some black coffee. My hands didn't shake. The dark liquid fell in a perfect, silent stream. I turned around, leaned my hip against the counter, and looked the psychiatrist dead in the eyes. "Dr. Monroe," I finally spoke, my voice ringing out, crystal clear, rock steady, and entirely void of any emotional distress. "I completely understand your position. You were called in on an emergency. You were paid a premium for a house call, and you were fed a heartbreaking family tragedy. If you'd like, you can run whatever cognitive tests you deem necessary. Ask me to count backward from 100 by sevens. Ask me to memorize 3 random words. Ask me who the President of the United States is or what year it is. I am entirely at your disposal. But before we begin, I strongly suggest you ask my son and my daughter-in-law to leave my kitchen. Medical evaluations require patient privacy." "Do they not?" She looked at Jason, then at Chloe, and finally gave a slow nod. "She is absolutely right," the psychiatrist said, clicking her pen shut. "Jason, Chloe, please wait for us in the living room. I need to speak with your mother alone." "Please step out," the doctor ordered this time, with a firm, clinical authority that left no room for argument. Jason ground his teeth, shooting me a lethal glare, and marched out of the kitchen, dragging Chloe by the elbow. I listened to their footsteps retreat down the hall to the living room. Once total silence reclaimed the room, I walked over to the table and sat in the chair directly across from Dr. Monroe. I placed my leather purse squarely on my lap. "All right, Martha," the psychiatrist began flipping her notepad open. "Do you know what day it is today?" "You are sitting here," I interrupted smoothly, "because my son Jason, who works as a logistics route supervisor and has a long documented history of catastrophic financial failures, desperately needs a legal loophole to strip me of my property. And regarding the incident with the laundry, there was absolutely no disorientation. Your client, my daughter-in-law, claims I threw away expensive clean clothing for no reason. The reality is this. Yesterday afternoon, in front of two of her friends, she pulled a makeup-stained silk blouse, a pair of sweatpants reeking of body odor, and a pair of dirty socks out of a hamper. She threw the bundle directly at my chest and ordered me to wash it immediately, adding verbatim the phrase, "That's why we give you a free roof in this house." I did not scream. I did not cry. And I certainly did not lose my memory. I simply picked up the clothes, walked to the laundry room, stuffed every single piece of clothing she owned into two heavy-duty industrial trash bags, dragged them out to the curb, and waited patiently for the city garbage truck to arrive at 4:40 p.m. I watched the compactor shred the clothes to pieces. It was a deliberate, highly calculated, and fully conscious act of deep cleaning. I get 8 hours of sleep. I eat the food I cook myself because my daughter-in-law exclusively orders takeout and abandons the greasy containers on this exact table for me to scrub. I continued unzipping my purse. I pulled out a small black notebook, my meticulous ledger from the last 2 years. I slid it across the table into the doctor's hands. There are the accounts, Dr. Monroe. Dates, amounts, confirmation numbers. For a year and a half, I have paid 100% of the electricity, water, gas, and internet in this house using my retirement pension. My son and his wife do not contribute a single dime, yet they receive online shopping packages weekly. Jason makes enough money to rent an apartment, but Chloe prefers to live here, treating me like her unpaid live-in maid because it allows her to maintain a lifestyle they simply cannot afford. I am not crazy, doctor. I have just finally stopped being docile. She flipped through the stapled receipts in the back pages. The silence in the kitchen grew thick, heavy with the crushing weight of undeniable evidence. The doctor closed the notebook and handed it back to me. There was a mix of profound respect and deep pity in her eyes, the specific kind of look a professional reserves for the hardened survivor of a prolonged shipwreck. "Martha," the psychiatrist said, snapping her briefcase shut, "you possess an enviable level of lucidity. Your orientation in time, space, and person is absolutely flawless. Your short and long-term memory are fully intact, and your capacity for judgment and reasoning is superior to most people your age. What you are suffering from is not dementia. It is severe financial and psychological abuse. Therefore, I am taking action. I am going to charge them the absolute maximum penalty rate for an unjustified emergency home visit. And if you ever need a medical expert witness for a legal proceeding, my card is on the table." My mind briefly flashed back to the notary's office 30 years ago. It was a gloomy place downtown that smelled of dark tobacco and damp paper. The clatter of mechanical typewriters filled the air. Arthur was sitting next to me, his heavy work boots covered in sawdust, leaving tracks on the marble floor. His hands were violently shaking. That very morning at the lumber yard, a bandsaw had snapped, amputating 3 of the foreman's fingers right in front of his eyes. The sheer terror of death, of sudden disability, had shattered whatever tiny fraction of faith Arthur had in the future. When the notary pushed the deed for the land we were buying across the desk, Arthur physically recoiled. "Put it all in her name," my husband had said, his voice cracking. "Only in Martha's name. If that saw takes my hand, the company lawyers will sue us for everything to avoid paying my disability pension. Make the house yours, Martha, only yours. That way nobody can ever touch it." I had picked up the pen. My signature was firm, dark, and absolute. Arthur's cowardice, his pathological terror of conflict and disaster, was paradoxically the exact thing that handed me the most impenetrable legal armor a woman of my generation could ever ask for. He did it out of pure fear. I accepted it as a blood pact, a pact my son, in his blinding arrogance, knew absolutely nothing about. Dr. Monroe stood up, ripped the invoice from her pad, and walked toward the kitchen door. I followed a few steps behind. When we reached the hallway, Jason and Chloe jumped up from the living room sofa, their faces painted with anxious expectation. Jason rushed forward, holding out his hand to receive what he fully believed was my civil death warrant. "So, doctor," my son asked, trying his hardest to sound devastated, "how rapid is the progression of the dementia?" Do we need to institutionalize her? Weaponizing psychiatric emergency services in an attempt to declare a relative incompetent over a domestic living dispute is a severe ethical violation, Dr. Monroe replied icily. My fee for this visit is $200. I strongly suggest you wire it to my account before noon. Good day. Jason's eyes scanned the lines written by the doctor, and I watched the blood completely drain from his face, only to be instantly replaced by a dark, creeping flush of pure rage crawling up his neck. Chloe, peering over his shoulder, read the certificate and balled her hands into tight fists at her sides. Their brilliant master plan had been entirely dismantled in less than 20 minutes. If she's not crazy, then she did it out of pure evil, Chloe hissed, her voice vibrating with fury, instantly dropping the act of the deeply concerned daughter-in-law. I told you, Jason, she's a bitter old hag and she hates me. She threw my clothes in the trash, knowing exactly what she was doing. She humiliated me on purpose. There wasn't a single trace left of the little boy I had once rocked to sleep. Standing in front of me was nothing but a cornered man, suffocating in his own mediocrity, desperate to establish dominance. All right, fine. Mom, if you want to play the lucid game and start a war in this house, we're going to play by my rules, Jason snarled, pointing his index finger just inches from my nose. As of right now, things change. Since you're so healthy, you can start packing your bags. This Sunday, Chloe's parents are coming into town for dinner. They're driving in from up north, and they're going to stay for a couple of weeks to help us get on our feet financially. We are giving them your room, the master bedroom. You are moving into the sewing room at the back of the house. It's small, but it's enough for you. We are taking over the administration of this house because clearly you don't know how to live with a family. You have until Sunday morning to empty your closets. If you don't do it, I will, and I'll throw your trash out in the yard. Are we clear? They wanted to exile me from my own bedroom, the room I had shared with my husband for 40 years, just to install Chloe's parents as the new monarchs of the conquered territory. It was the final nail in the coffin. It was the absolute confirmation that to Jason the First was no longer a mother. I was merely a physical obstacle that needed to be removed and confined to a dark corner. As I stood there, listening to him dictate my banishment, a third memory hit me with the stinging force of a whip. It was the night they showed up at my door, begging for shelter. The torrential rain beating against the living room windows, Chloe soaked to the bone, shivering, clutching her designer suitcase, Jason crying at the kitchen table. Just a few months, Mom, he had said. I swear we won't be a burden. We'll respect your space, your routine. We just need a place to crash until the storm passes. We're begging you. And Chloe, looking at me with those big, pathetic doe eyes, had added, You are an absolute angel, Martha. We will never forget this. This is your house, and we will be completely invisible. I stared at my son's index finger threatening me. Then I looked at Chloe, who was smirking with pure superiority from down the hall, genuinely believing that her husband's brute force had finally broken me. I didn't move a single muscle in my face. I didn't show an ounce of pain or indignation or fear. Slowly, with the exact same deliberate patience I used when threading a needle at the shop, I nodded my head. Sunday, I repeated, my voice sounding hollow and accommodating a velvet trap laid perfectly over a pit of spikes. I think Sunday is an excellent day to make some permanent changes to the administration of this house. Don't worry, Jason. By the time lunch is served on Sunday, everything will be exactly where it belongs. We want them to feel like they own the place. I polished the hardwood floors until they caught the sunlight like sheets of glass. I washed the living room drapes. I vacuumed every single corner. I waxed the dining room table. Jason and Chloe watched me from the periphery, smiling with smug satisfaction, assuming my cleaning frenzy was simply the quiet acceptance of my new role as the permanent live-in maid for their extended family. Arthur, sensing the highly lethal electrical charge in the air, spent the entire weekend locked inside the tool shed, fleeing the imminent cataclysm. On Sunday morning, I woke up at dawn. I prepared the largest, most expensive cut of bone-in short rib I could find at the local butcher. I minced garlic, onions, and peppers, creating a rich marinade that filled the entire house with a thick, festive aroma. I threw together fresh salads, baked homemade bread, and pulled out my absolute best porcelain china, the set I only ever used for Thanksgiving. I set the dining room table with a crisp white linen tablecloth, aligning the heavy silver cutlery with millimeter precision. Right in the center of the table, directly next to where the steaming platter of meat would go, I placed a small, completely empty wicker bread basket. At 12:30 p.m., I walked into my bedroom. I opened my leather purse. I pulled out the manila envelope containing the 3 original copies of the notarized eviction notice, signed, sealed, and dated by Robert Vance, explicitly stipulating the non-negotiable 30-day legal deadline for Jason and Chloe to vacate my property due to the revocation of their tenancy at will. The paper felt heavy, loaded with the sheer force of 40 years of sweat and scars. I folded the envelope in half and slipped it into the deep front pocket of my white apron, pressing it flat against my stomach. The front doorbell rang at exactly 1 o'clock. I heard Chloe's high-pitched shrieks of excitement echoing down the hall, the deadbolt clicking open, and the booming voices of her parents flooding the foyer. "Oh my God, this house is absolutely gorgeous, sweetie," exclaimed the raspy voice of Chloe's mother. "Jason told me you guys are finally taking full control of the place. It's about time you had the space you deserve." I took a deep breath, savoring the smell of roasted meat and impending betrayal, and walked slowly toward the dining room, ready to serve them the main course. The aroma of roasted short rib, crispy garlic, and fresh rosemary flooded the room, instantly clashing with the sickeningly sweet, heavy perfume Chloe's mother had bathed in. The scene unfolding around my oak dining table, the exact same table I had bought secondhand and restored, sanding the wood down until my fingerprints were practically gone, was the textbook definition of a completed hostile invasion. Robert, my daughter-in-law's father, had planted himself at the head of the table, in the chair Arthur had occupied for 40 years. He was a massive, red-faced man with a booming voice, wearing a gaudy, overly bright gold watch on his left wrist. Sitting to his right was Consuelo, his wife, a woman who shared Chloe's desperate, clawing need to project a social status she didn't actually possess, weighed down by chunky costume jewelry and hair frozen solid with hairspray. Jason and Chloe sat on the sides, beaming with the smug complacency of a king and queen, presenting their newly conquered kingdom to the visiting royal court. Not a single person stood up to help me carry the 10-pound serving platter. Not a single person even offered the basic courtesy of moving their crystal water glasses to make room for me. I walked with my spine rigidly straight, my sensible shoes muffling my footsteps against the polished wood, and set the steaming mountain of meat dead center on the white linen tablecloth, right next to the empty wicker basket. "Well, damn, that smells pretty good," Robert commented, leaning over the table to inhale the steam rolling off the beef, without so much as glancing in my direction. "Jason warned me the home cooking around here was a little on the bland side, but this looks all right. Pass me the carving knife, son. I'll handle the honors. In my house, the man of the family always serves the meat. And pop open that red I bought last week, the Black Label." I didn't change my expression. I simply turned on my heel and walked back into the kitchen. As I uncorked the bottle of wine on the counter, the echoes of their conversation drifted to my ears with an insulting, crystal-clear clarity. "It's a fantastic piece of property, Jason. I really gotta hand it to you." Robert's raspy voice boomed. "Chloe mentioned you guys made a brilliant investment taking over this house, but I had no idea the layout was this huge. With a solid remodel, this place is going to be worth a fortune in a couple of years. Gotta modernize it, though. That dark wood is way out of style. Jason and I were talking about knocking down the wall between the living room and the hall for an open concept. And hey, now that we're here, we're going to start by fixing up the master bedroom. The natural light from that big window is going to be perfect for you, honey. Jason already decided you guys can keep that room for as long as you need. It's the absolute least we can do to keep you comfortable while you help us with the grandkids whenever we decide to have them. At her age, old folks get way too attached to their stuff. Plus, it's about time that we, the ones actually bringing the youth and the future to this family, take over the administration. She just needs to kick back, relax, and, help out with the light kitchen chores. Like today." The weight of the manila envelope in my apron pocket felt like a block of ice against my stomach. anchoring me firmly to reality while they floated away in their pathetic bubble of delusions. I walked back in and started pouring the wine, first for Robert, then for Consuelo. The dark red liquid splashed into the glasses with a steady, rhythmic glug, staining the immaculate crystal. The lie they had spun was breathtaking. Jason and Chloe hadn't just physically hijacked my house, they had constructed an entire alternate reality for their guests. They had convinced them that they were the rightful owners, the wealthy providers, the magnanimous benefactors, graciously allowing Jason's elderly mother to live under their roof out of pure, saintly charity. They had completely erased my 40 years of broken nails and bleeding fingers. They had hidden the fact that my Social Security checks paid for the very lights shining down on them and the water they were drinking. And they had successfully reduced me to the role of a domestic burden who should be getting on her knees to thank them for their supposed generosity. "Thanks, Martha. Just leave the bottle right there," Consuelo told me, waving a hand dismissively, without making eye contact, using that exact condescending tone pretentious women specifically reserve for the hired help. "And do me a favor, make sure the guest bathroom is stocked with fresh towels. I'd like to freshen up a bit after we eat." Robert was already slicing into the meat, aggressively piling massive portions onto the porcelain plates. The fat sizzled softly. The banquet had reached its absolute peak of opulence, a feast funded entirely by my own wallet, thrown to celebrate my own exile. I stood a few feet away from the table, my hands clasped loosely over my apron. Jason picked up his fork, but right before he could stab his first piece of short rib, he swiveled his chair to face me. The moment had finally arrived. The moment he considered the grand culmination of his victory, his official coronation in front of his newly acquired royal court. "All right, Mom." Jason started dabbing the corner of his mouth with the linen napkin. "Since we're all sitting here together. And just like we agreed on Friday, I think this is the perfect time to make the new arrangements official. My in-laws are exhausted from the drive, and they're going to want to get settled into the master bedroom right after lunch to take a nap. I need you to hand over the keys to your room right now. And please tell me you already got all your stuff out of the closets, because I really don't want Chloe having to deal with bagging up your old clothes this afternoon." Robert and Consuelo stared at me, fully expecting to see a defeated old woman obediently surrendering the keys to her castle. Chloe smirked from behind her wine glass, her eyes shining with a vicious, triumphant malice. She was savoring every single microsecond of my public humiliation, drinking in her revenge for the wardrobe the garbage truck had chewed to pieces 3 days ago. I didn't move an inch. I kept my breathing slow and even, feeling the steady, rhythmic thud of my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I slowly slid my right hand into the deep front pocket of my white apron. My calloused fingers, trained to find a lost needle in the pitch black, brushed against the edge of the manila envelope. "Did you not hear me, Mom?" Jason snapped, raising his voice, his tone suddenly gaining a sharp, aggressive edge of impatience. His absolute authority was being publicly tested in front of his audience, and his fragile ego couldn't handle a 3-second delay. "I asked for the keys to the master bedroom. Hand them over right now. Are you seriously trying to make a scene in front of my in-laws? Do you want me to call Dr. Monroe back over here and tell her you're having another psychotic episode? I told you the changes were happening today, and in this house, what I say goes." He had lived inside his delusion for so long that he had genuinely started believing his own lie. And worse, he had dragged his guests straight into the exact same hallucination. I pulled out the 3 copies of the notarized eviction notice. They were perfectly stapled, stamped with the crisp blue seal of Robert Vance's law firm, and bore my bold signature on the final page. I took the first copy, and with a sharp, decisive flick of my wrist, I slid it across the linen tablecloth, stopping it dead exactly next to Jason's dinner plate. I took the second copy and placed it directly in front of Chloe. The third copy I kept gripped in my hand. "What is this?" Jason stammered, glancing down at the document. "A list of complaints? A chore chart? Mom, I seriously do not have time for your passive-aggressive little games today." I watched the smug arrogance instantly drain from his features, replaced by a sickly, chalky pallor. His pupils blew wide open. His hands started to shake violently, making the thick legal paper rattle with a pathetic, vibrating hum. This is a fake, my son stuttered, his voice totally stripped of the artificial, booming authority he had faked just 2 minutes prior. This isn't legally binding. It's just some crap you printed off the internet. But as his eyes darted down the paragraphs of heavy legal jargon, his face morphed from confusion to absolute shock, and finally to a dark, suffocating panic. "Can somebody explain to me what the hell this means?" Robert demanded, slamming his copy against the table with the back of his hand. His booming voice rattled the crystal. He glared at Jason, then at Chloe. "It says right here, notice of revocation of tenancy at will. It says Martha Carmen Salazar is the sole exclusive legal owner of this property, and that she is granting a non-negotiable 30-day legal deadline for the occupants, Jason Salazar and Chloe Rojas, to vacate the premises." "What is this garbage, Jason?" "You looked me in the eye and told me you bought this house 3 years ago." Jason spun toward me, his eyes practically bulging out of his skull, baring his teeth in a snarl of aggressive desperation. "You are out of your goddamn mind. You and Dad bought this house together. It's marital property. I have inheritance rights. You can't just throw me out on the street with some cheap lawyer's printout." The last drop of maternal pity I had left evaporated, leaving behind only the freezing, relentless machinery of justice. "Your father, in a blind panic 30 years ago, legally insisted that the deed be placed exclusively in my name to protect our assets from potential workplace lawsuits at the lumber mill," I explained, my voice echoing clear and methodical, directing my words not just to Jason, but directly to Chloe's parents. "In the eyes of the law, this dirt, these bricks, and this roof belong exclusively to me. You have 0 inheritance rights because I am not dead yet. And you have 0 tenant rights because we never signed a lease. You have lived here purely under my tolerance, a tolerance that expired the second I signed that paper." I turned my gaze to Robert and Consuelo. "I am deeply sorry they dragged you into this pathetic charade. You drove all the way down here believing you were going to take command of an estate owned by your successful son-in-law. The brutal reality is that your son-in-law doesn't even own the silverware you are about to eat with. He makes a decent enough salary to rent a normal apartment, but they actively chose to live here like parasites to fund a luxury lifestyle that your daughter demands and that he cannot afford." "Shut your mouth," Chloe shrieked, pointing at me with violently shaking hands. "She's evil, Dad. She's a selfish old bitch, and she hates us. She's throwing us out on the street out of pure spite just because I forgot to wipe the counters a few times. I am throwing you out because you turned my home into a toxic landfill so you could play rich housewife for your friends," I corrected her, my voice slicing through her hysterics like a razor blade. "And I am throwing you out because you allowed my son to believe he could strip me of my peace and my dignity." "Shut the hell up," Jason roared, storming around the table and stopping less than 2 feet from my face. "I am not going to let you humiliate me in my own house. I'm going to rip that piece of paper into 1,000 pieces, and I'm going to lock you in that back sewing room until you rot. You are not throwing me out on the street, do you hear me? I am your son." I simply looked him dead in the eyes, wielding my absolute silence as the most lethal weapon a disappointed mother could ever possess. I felt the volatile electricity in the air, Consuelo screaming her son-in-law's name in blind panic, Chloe's jagged, hyperventilating breaths. Jason had his fist clenched, trembling in the air between us, but the hollow, freezing, unbreakable stare I shot back at him completely paralyzed his muscles. He knew in the absolute deepest, darkest pit of his cowardice that if he laid a single finger on me, the police would drag him out of here in handcuffs before the sun went down. Slowly, agonizingly, Jason lowered his arm. His shoulders slumped. The blind rage gave way to the crushing, suffocating realization of his own utter impotence. He didn't have a dime for a legal battle. He didn't have the backing of his father, who was still cowering in the yard, and now he had completely lost the respect of his in-laws. I folded the third copy of the eviction notice, the one I was still holding in my hand, and carefully slipped it into the front breast pocket of his gray work shirt. I smoothed the fabric over his chest with 2 sharp, definitive pats. "This past Thursday afternoon in front of your little friends?" I started slowly turning my head to lock my eyes onto Chloe, who physically shrank back into her chair as if my words carried physical mass. "You threw a stained blouse and a pair of reeking sweatpants directly at my face. You demanded I wash them immediately, and you told me with an arrogance I will not forget as long as I live that was why you gave me a free roof in this house, so I was at least good for something." Consuelo covered her mouth with both hands in pure horror. I snapped my attention back to Jason, who was staring down at the legal paper sticking out of his pocket like it was a terminal diagnosis. "The bitter irony, Jason, is that she was absolutely right about the concept. She just got the recipient completely backwards," I whispered, my voice loaded with a crushing finality that echoed in the dead silence of the dining room. "That is exactly why I gave you both a free roof for 2 entire years, so you would at least learn how to respect the person putting food in your mouths. But since you refuse to learn, the roof is officially gone. If there is a single shoe belonging to either of you left on this property on day 31, Robert Vance will arrive with a police cruiser and a court-ordered lockout, and I will personally haul your belongings out to the curb in black industrial trash bags." The front doorbell rang for a second time, a sharp, prolonged buzz that sliced through the graveyard silence of the dining room like a train whistle right before a derailment. Not a single person moved a muscle. Jason stood absolutely petrified, his eyes glued to the notarized paper sticking out of his uniform. Chloe was violently trembling in her chair, her face streaked with the mascara-stained tears of her own exposed lies, while her parents, Robert and Consuelo, breathed with the heavy, labored gasps of people who had just realized the floor beneath them was made of rotting cardboard. The short ribs, steaming and perfect in the center of the table, was rapidly getting cold. The sizzling of the fat had almost completely died out. I turned my back on them with the exact same calm indifference I used when walking away from a finished piece of furniture and strolled down the hardwood hallway toward the foyer. My shoes tapped out that steady, relentless beat. I pulled open the front door. Standing on the porch trying to beat the midday sun was a young guy in a navy blue polo shirt holding a rectangular cardboard box stamped with the black and gold logo of one of the most wildly expensive boutiques at the high-end mall downtown. The kid wiped the sweat off his forehead with the back of his hand and held out an electronic tablet. "Afternoon. Rush delivery cash on delivery requested for a Chloe Rojas," the courier announced, dragging his words with the bone-deep exhaustion of someone who had been driving in traffic all day. "Total comes to $480.50. I can take card, but the swiper's been glitching out, so cash is way better if you have it." I heard the harsh screech of a wooden dining chair violently pushing back. Chloe appeared in the archway of the hall, pale as a sheet of drywall, frantically wiping her cheeks with both hands. Looming right behind her was the massive, furious shadow of her father, followed by Jason's hunched, defeated silhouette. I didn't ask for that to be delivered today," Chloe stammered, taking clumsy steps toward the door, desperately trying to block the delivery guy's view of the house. "I thought the charge already went through on my credit card online. There has to be a glitch in the store's system." "The slip says your card declined 3 times last night for insufficient funds, ma'am, and you selected the COD option this morning, so you wouldn't lose the reservation on the order," the courier replied, completely unimpressed. "Manifest says it's a pair of designer heels and a matching clutch. Are you paying, or am I putting this back on the truck?" Chloe slowly turned toward Jason, shooting him that manipulative, begging look that had worked like a charm for years. "Baby, my card is maxed out. Can you just cover it? It's the outfit I literally have to wear for my parents' anniversary dinner next week. I'll pay you back on the 15th, I swear." The man had just been legally served with an eviction notice. His father-in-law had just uncovered his absolute moral and financial bankruptcy, and his wife, standing dead center in the middle of the apocalypse, was asking him for $500 for a pair of shoes. "I don't have that kind of money, Chloe." Jason whispered, his voice cracking, entirely stripped of the arrogant, chest-thumping authority he had paraded around the roast beef just minutes ago. I have absolutely nothing in checking, and you know it. I swear to God I am not giving you another single dime for your clothes. I reached out and gently pushed the front door shut until the latch clicked with a soft, definitive snap. The silence that settled over the foyer was incredibly dense, suffocating. Loaded with a humiliation so pure, you could practically taste it in the air. Robert looked Jason up and down, visually dissecting his gray logistics uniform, his eyes locking onto the manila envelope sticking out of his chest pocket. The disgust radiating from the older man was absolute. He was actively stripping my son of his manhood, his dignity, and his status, all in a matter of seconds. "Consuelo!" Robert barked, never taking his eyes off Jason. Chloe's mother appeared trembling in the hallway, clutching her purse tight against her chest. "Go upstairs to that guest room, pack our bags, call a cab. We are going to a hotel downtown. I am not spending one more minute under this woman's roof, eating the meat she paid for while my daughter and her deadbeat husband play pretend millionaires by bleeding an old woman's pension dry." They didn't say a single word to me. Not because they hated me, but because the crushing guilt and secondhand embarrassment physically prevented them from looking me in the eye. Jason and Chloe just stood there in the foyer, entirely alone, surrounded by the deafening echo of their own shattered lies, watching through the window as the taxi pulled away down the tree-lined street. I didn't stick around to watch the mourning process. I walked right back into the dining room. I sat down in my chair, picked up the carving knife, sliced off a perfect, tender cut of short rib that was still holding on to a little heat, and served myself a generous spoonful of fresh salad. I ate in total silence, chewing slowly, savoring the bite of the garlic and the earthy pine of the rosemary. From the hallway, the screaming match finally erupted. Venomous accusations muffled insults, the sharp crack of something plastic shattering against the drywall. Jason blamed Chloe for her insane spending habits. Chloe blamed Jason for being a pathetic loser who couldn't even defend his own wife. Full-blown civil war had broken out in the enemy trenches. I poured myself half a glass of the Black Label red wine. I raised it in a silent toast to the empty chair at the head of the table, and I took a long, satisfying sip. The very next day marked the beginning of the true siege. A 30-day war of attrition, where my only weapon was the ruthless, unforgiving execution of my daily routine. First thing Monday morning, I called the cable company. I demanded the immediate cancellation of the premium television package and ordered a complete reset of the Wi-Fi password. The router, which had lived on a console table in the hallway for years, was unplugged, moved into my bedroom, and locked securely away. When Chloe finally rolled out of bed at noon and discovered she couldn't upload selfies or stream her reality shows, she stomped down to the kitchen demanding answers. I didn't even look at her. I just kept whisking my eggs for breakfast. Her temper tantrum bounced off my back like pebbles against a concrete bunker. On Tuesday, I bought a heavy-duty forged steel padlock and installed it directly onto the door of the large kitchen pantry, locking away all my non-perishables, my imported olive oils, my whole bean coffee, and my homemade jams. I completely cleared out the top 2 shelves of the main refrigerator, moving my fresh vegetables, lean meats, and dairy into a small mini fridge Arthur used to keep in his workshop, which I had hauled upstairs to my bedroom. On the newly empty kitchen shelves, I very carefully arranged Chloe's half-eaten pizza boxes, her sticky Chinese takeout cartons, and a carton of milk she had left sitting out on the counter the night before. On Wednesday, Jason tried to confront me. He cornered me in the laundry room while I was loading a batch of whites. His face was gaunt, carved with deep, dark bags under his eyes, and his uniform reeked of cheap cigarette smoke, a nasty habit his anxiety had forced him to pick back up. "What exactly are you trying to prove with this, Mom?" my son hissed, gripping the plastic edge of the washing machine. "You cut off the internet. You locked up the food. Chloe is literally having panic attacks upstairs because she can't talk to her friends. Does it amuse you to torture us? Do you feel like a god right now just because you have that lawyer's paper?" "I simply stopped financing the luxury lifestyle you should be providing for your own wife," I replied smoothly. If Chloe needs internet, you can call your provider and add a data plan to her phone. If you guys want fresh food, the grocery store is exactly 4 blocks away, and it stays open until 10. You both demanded the right to administer your own lives. I am merely granting you the absolute freedom to do exactly that, using your own money. And just a friendly reminder, Jason, you have 27 days left. Chloe was forced to start hand-washing her clothes in the bathroom sink, absolutely terrified to step foot near the laundry room, for fear her garments would magically vanish into industrial trash bags again. I caught her one afternoon trying to dry a bunch of cheap blouses by hanging them off the doorknobs in the hall, her ruined, manicured hands shaking with pure frustration. Her country club friends completely abandoned her. The rumor of her spectacular humiliation in front of her parents had spread through their social circle with the speed of a wildfire in dry brush. The illusion of the wealthy, self-sacrificing young socialite had totally disintegrated, leaving behind nothing but a miserable woman, trapped in the wreckage of her own staggering arrogance. It was during the second week that Arthur, my husband, finally decided to emerge from his shell of cowardice. He had spent the last 14 days hiding out in the tool shed at the back of the property, listening to baseball games on his radio, eating cold sandwiches I left on the back windowsill, just so he wouldn't have to cross paths with our son. But the tension was too thick even for him to ignore. One Tuesday night, while I was sitting at the dining table, stitching up a tear in the hem of a curtain, Arthur shuffled in, wearing his worn-out slippers. He sat in the chair across from me, turned off his hearing aid, and looked at me with those watery, begging eyes he always deployed whenever he wanted me to magically fix the chaos he had allowed to happen. "Martha," Arthur mumbled, scratching at a gray beard he hadn't shaved in days. "Enough is enough, don't you think? Jason is hurting real bad. I hear him crying out on the patio in the middle of the night, and that girl Chloe, she's pale as a ghost. They're family, Martha. Blood calls to blood. You can't just throw them out on the street like stray dogs. Tell them they can stay. Give them strict rules if you want, but please don't break the family apart." I don't want to live in a house where my own son hates my guts. The black cotton thread pulled tight, drawing a perfectly straight line under the glow of the table lamp. I looked up at the man I had shared a bed with for 4.5 decades, the man who had abandoned me in every single trench, during every financial crisis, and through every single parenting conflict we ever faced. "You surrendered your family the day you turned off your hearing aid so you wouldn't have to listen to your daughter-in-law insult me, Arthur." I told him my voice, completely devoid of anger, loaded only with a cold, immovable truth. "You broke Jason the day you taught him that bowing his head and hiding in the dark was what made a man. This house is mine. I built it, I maintain it, and I am the only one who decides who gets to breathe the air inside it. Jason and Chloe are leaving on day 30. There is no negotiation. There is no magical forgiveness. If their departure hurts you that much, pack your bags and go with them. I am offering you the exact same freedom I offered him. But if you decide to stay in my house, you will follow my rules. And the very first rule is that we do not shed a single tear for people who actively tried to destroy us." The remaining days burned down fast, like the cherry on one of Jason's cheap cigarettes, quick, highly toxic, and leaving nothing but a trail of gray ash on the floor. On day 28, they finally started packing. They didn't hire a professional moving company. Obviously, their credit was shot. Jason had to beg for used cardboard boxes from the corner grocery store. The harsh, screeching tear of packing tape echoed down the hallways for 48 uninterrupted hours. The morning of day 30 broke gray and overcast, with a biting chill in the air, signaling the bitter end of autumn. At exactly 9 a.m., a rusted-out flatbed truck, likely borrowed from one of Jason's warehouse buddies, parked violently against my curb. I sat down in my dark green velvet armchair in the living room, wrapping my hands around a hot mug of black coffee, and I watched the parade of absolute defeat. Jason hauled the heavy boxes out, his muscles shaking from the sheer exertion, his face dripping with cold sweat. He wouldn't even look at me. He just shuffled past the living room archway with his head bowed, dragging his feet like a prisoner. Chloe carried the light stuff, her bedside lamps, the shiny plastic decorations I so deeply despised, her stacks of fashion magazines. But the true, undeniable poetic irony of the morning arrived when I watched her walk toward the front door, carrying what was left of her wardrobe. Since they couldn't afford proper wardrobe boxes, Chloe was forced to stuff her remaining sweaters and dresses into massive black plastic bags, heavy-duty industrial trash bags, the exact same brand I had used to feed the garbage compactor. She scurried past me, dragging the heavy plastic across the hardwood, her eyes locked dead on the open front door, fleeing my presence as if I were a walking plague. By 11:30, the guest room was completely hollowed out. The only thing left was the thick layer of dust trapped behind the furniture they had never bothered to clean. Jason stopped in the threshold of the front door. He was filthy, utterly exhausted, and totally broken. He was holding the keys to my house in his right hand. He stared at them for a long second, pressed his lips into a tight line, and walked slowly into the living room. He stopped 6 feet from my armchair and dropped the key ring onto the oak coffee table. The metal hit the wood with a sharp, stinging clatter. "Here are your damn keys," Jason said, his voice raw and raspy, scraping the absolute bottom of his shattered pride. "Are you happy now, Mom? Are you proud of what you pulled off? You won. You threw us out on the street. We're moving into a tiny 2-bedroom dump on the south side, right next to a highway that never sleeps, because it's literally the only deposit I could afford. You destroyed your own flesh and blood over some laundry and your own stubborn pride." "I wasn't playing a game, Jason, which means I didn't win a damn thing," I replied calmly, setting my coffee mug down on its ceramic coaster. "And I didn't destroy my flesh and blood. You destroyed yourself the exact second you stood there and clapped while your wife threw her rotting garbage in my face. That highway you're moving next to, you paved it yourself with every single electric bill you refused to pay. Get out. And close the door gently on your way out. I just oiled the hinges." He spun around on his heel, marched down the hallway, stepped out onto the porch, and pulled the heavy oak door shut behind him. The heavy metallic thud of the deadbolt sliding into place was the most beautiful piece of music I had heard in 2 years. I stood up from my armchair, walked to the front door, and threw the manual security chain. Then I went straight to the kitchen, grabbed a bucket, filled it with scalding hot water and pine-scented bleach, and spent the next 5 solid hours aggressively scrubbing the hardwood floors of the entire house, literally erasing the footprints of their shoes, purifying the air, and violently reclaiming every single square inch of my territory. 6 months later, spring had finally breathed color back into the rose garden. The house felt alive again. I had rolled up and thrown away the living room rug that still stubbornly clung to the stench of Chloe's sweet perfume, leaving the hardwood bare, clean, and gleaming. My ferns and African violets had made a triumphant return from their backyard exile, reclaiming their rightful spots in the sunlit corners of the hallway and the end tables. Arthur was still living here, of course, but he had fully transitioned into a quiet, incredibly docile ghost. He spent his days out in the yard, tending the flower beds, cleaning the gutters, speaking in low murmurs, and making absolutely sure he never left a mess in my kitchen. The balance of power had been restored with the brutal force of a sledgehammer. It was a Thursday afternoon, right around 4:40 p.m. I was out sweeping the concrete sidewalk in front of my house, gathering up the dried petals the wind had ripped from the oak trees. The deep roar of the city garbage truck's diesel engine announced its arrival from around the corner. The massive green and white beast hissed to a stop right in front of me with a blast of air brakes. Mike, the broad-shouldered garbage man, hopped down onto the asphalt. He had a bright, easy smile, his face shining with a layer of afternoon sweat. I handed him an ice-cold plastic cup of fresh lemonade I had waiting for him. "Afternoon, Miss Martha," Mike beamed, taking the cup with genuine gratitude and downing half of it in a single gulp. "The front of the house is looking real sharp. Place seems real peaceful lately." He glanced up and down the street before dropping his voice, a register sliding into that hushed, neighborhood gossip tone that binds working-class folks together. "Listen, I don't know if I should even bring this up, but I actually saw your boy last week," Mike told me, his face softening with a look of genuine pity. "Dispatch rerouted us for a couple of days down by those beat-up old apartment complexes on the south side. I saw him walking out of one of those gray cinder block buildings, the ones with the massive water stains on the siding. He was in his dirty work uniform, hoofing it toward the bus stop. And his wife, Chloe, I saw her working the cash register through the window of that discount pharmacy on the corner. She was wearing one of those neon green employee vests. Looked like she was in a screaming match with a customer over some expired coupons. They looked real beat down, Miss Martha. Real tired. The mental image of Chloe, the exact same woman who demanded imported sushi platters and humiliated elderly women for sport in front of her rich friends, trapped behind a dirty cash register, fighting for her life over 50-cent coupons. It didn't bring me joy. It didn't bring me a sense of triumphant victory, and it certainly didn't bring me an ounce of remorse. It brought me the exact same feeling I had when the steel compactor crushed her silk blouse. The quiet, absolute certainty that the mathematics of the universe are flawless, and that the debt had been paid in full. Every person builds the roof they eventually have to live under, Mike, I told him, taking the empty plastic cup from his hands. You have a safe route. Dead center in the middle of the spare room, resting on two heavy wooden sawhorses, sat an antique dining chair I had picked up at a flea market that very morning. The mahogany wood was deeply gouged, the seat cushion was totally collapsed, and the original floral fabric was literally rotting away at the seams. It was an absolute disaster. It was perfect. I walked over to my heavy steel toolbox. I pulled out my needle-nose pliers, my tack hammer, and my heavy-duty pneumatic staple gun. I ran my calloused fingers, tracking over the faded white lines of decades-old scars across the jagged edge of the damaged wood. I grabbed a piece of the new fabric, a thick, incredibly durable, unbleached heavy canvas, and pulled it bone-tight over the fresh, dense foam. I pressed the steel nose of the staple gun hard against the hardwood frame, calculating the exact perfect angle. I took a deep breath in the absolute, unbroken silence of my own home, and I pulled the trigger. The metallic crack echoed through the room, loud, firm, and utterly definitive, driving the steel staple into the wood exactly where I wanted it to be.